start. And so thank you to everyone who's joined us. I want to, both online and here in person, to really talk about today a couple of things. I think overarchingly, of course, the power of education and how important it is that we focus on girls' education in particular to really drive a lot of really positive outcomes. And but also specifically to learn from and hear from Shabana and the work she has done at the School of Leadership Afghanistan for so many years. Um, just as a point of kind of personal privilege, I think I was very lucky to meet Shabana when I was working with Jean, Ambassador Maines, when we were both in Afghanistan. And so it's really an honor to be able to honor you and the work that you've continued to do over the years, and your commitment to, girls' education, to Afghanistan, and to really kind of opening doors for so many people. So I'm very, we're going to hear really from Shabana and Jean about the work specifically done by SOLA, but also sort of this broader context of how we all can think about supporting girls' education around the world, whether it's our governments doing it, private citizens, international organizations, and really kind of have that conversation. And then also, of course, I'm honored that I'm going to give Shabana an award. So, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So we're going to start the conversation. And I will just say a couple of things. I know many of you who are joining, I noticed by who's on the list earlier that you are familiar with Afghanistan or SOLA, maybe you served there, or you are part of the family of people who care a lot about what's going on in that country and care a lot about women and girls generally, internationally, and also how we can move forward. But I do want to say we're joined today, obviously, by Ambassador Jean Maines, who worked at the embassy in Afghanistan when I was there. She was my boss, the public affairs officer. She's been our ambassador to El Salvador and now is the deputy chief of mission at UNESCO, which obviously, we all think of UNESCO, and myself included, as being the people who put out the great guide of like places to visit around the world that are historical kind of markers for all of us, but also UNESCO does so much work on education. And so it's really fitting that Jean is part of this conversation as well. So with that, I'm just going to start right in and welcome all of you online to really please send in questions, and then Angela can go through them. And as we're having the conversation, just pop in a question and we will get to it hopefully over the course of the time, certainly before we wrap up today. So with that, Shabana, I am so impressed, I think is the right word, about how you've really sort of thought about the need for girls to be part of the educational system, both in Afghanistan, but also as, after the fall of Kabul and SOLA had to really think differently about the work it was doing to educate Afghan girls. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that journey for SOLA and how you see it changing, and also how you've been able to overcome challenges, because I know you've had them, and you always make it seem somewhat easy, which it isn't. So maybe you can kind of give us a sense of that, and how you've taken your commitment and really pushed forward for so many other people.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stephenie. And it's truly an honor to be here with all of you today, and to an Ambassador Maines, who the two of you visited SOLA in Afghanistan as one of a handful of people who from overseas could come and see the work we were doing in person. And so, and to all of you online, for your interest in this conversation, and not looking away from Afghan girls and women. So thank you. I'm also so grateful that we have everyone in the room here, our SOLA village, if you will. SOLA is what SOLA is today because of this village, this global village that really supports the work we're doing. And I think that the journey of SOLA can best be described. So much of it comes from my childhood experience accessing education, and I have to bring that into this conversation because of the current day struggles of Afghan girls and women, and then really tying it to what I truly believe in, the historic bravery of Afghan women. So I grew up under the first Taliban regime and was educated by Afghan women who didn't take Taliban's policies, didn't accept it, and ran their own underground schools, and in an effort to keep that hope alive for Afghan girls, and educating girls at extreme risk to themselves and their families. So I consider myself a product of that time, and observed and watched how women navigated those kinds of circumstances, risks, to themselves, to their families, and to the girls that they were educating, and a collective commitment that we all have to accept this risk, and we also all have to accept this. We have a shared sense of responsibility towards one another and the safety. I remember I went to a few different secret schools during the Taliban regime, and the one that I attended the most was operated by this amazing Afghan woman who was a high school principal before the Taliban took over. And her main job was to assess who she was admitting as students, but also to manage the daily traffic into her house and out of her house. And she would sit on a window shelf. There was no furniture in the room, the small room that we convened in. Her three daughters, who were medical school students and couldn't be continuing with their own education, were the teachers in our classrooms. And they would sit in three different corners of the room and teach every girl one on one, because we all found out about the secret school at different times, and so we were not part of a cohort or a class of students. And then this principal of ours, she would remind us every day that once we left her house, we needed to leave as quickly as we could, and if we were stopped or caught by the Taliban, that we needed to take them to our homes and not bring them to the house, because less people would be in trouble in our homes and more people would be at risk and get killed in her house. And I think we all believed in that, we all accepted that, and then her husband and her sons were involved. The sons were always outside in the neighborhood, making sure the neighbors were on board and supportive. And I bring the husbands and the son into this conversation too, because it's really important to always look at this holistically, and girls' education, fighting for women's rights in a place like Afghanistan. It's never just about girls and women. It's often most successful when you include boys and men into the conversation, and invite them into fighting for this right. And so that was really the beginnings. And then obviously my own journey post Taliban regime, the very first time, and then I'm continuing with public school education for the very first time in March of 2002, and really seeing the drastic difference between attending a public school with a visible, known location, with an exact, routine that was complete opposite of what I did growing up, in and of itself really made me question so many things about what it means to be a girl in a place like Afghanistan. And then I saw my own privilege being just on the rise compared to my peers. I attended public school as a seventh grader with a lot of girls who are 18 plus years old. And on daily basis, I didn't need reminders from family or others about how lucky and privileged I was to be in that situation. It would take a classmate coming in and in tears and saying, "This is my last day because I got engaged, and that means I'm getting married and I can't come to school anymore." And they were painful moments. They were the kinds of moments that we as girls only understood, and we couldn't even share that pain and that sadness at home or with others. It was that shared bonding. It was those last goodbyes, and remembering and carrying that pain, and thinking about what that meant. for the future of the country. And then I got very fortunate, lucky. I was nominated initially and then went through a series of um, testing to come to the US to attend a State Department funded high school exchange program for a year. And that was another moment for me because I came to the US thinking any girl globally who has access to education carries with her this burden and this fear that that access to education could be taken away from her for whatever reason, lack of family permission, a change in regime or government, etc. That was my reality, but I thought it to be a global, universal reality for girls. While it is true in so many parts of the world, but to come to the US and it didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, if you are a girl in any kind of circumstance, you could go to school, and there was no question whatsoever about that. And I found that so beautiful.
Hmm.
And teachers, educators, parents would complain about their children, not just their daughters, children taking their education for granted. And in different conversations, I would remind people that on the other side of it, I want so desperately that Afghan girls can take their education for granted.
Mm.
And that was something I wanted. It was something I had never experienced, and the beauty of it was so inspiring for me. And then I went on to college, and that was it. 2007 was a year that the UN published a report that said only 7% of girls have access to education at a university level. Afghan women, 6 or 7%, and attending a very prestigious liberal arts college in the New England area, already put me at an extremely privileged community of people, even in the U.S. And so I was struggling with my own privilege at a young age. How did I get to be so lucky? And what have I done to deserve this kind of an opportunity? Why me? And I constantly thought about what if this was given to someone else in my position? And okay, now that it's me, what next? How do I maximize these 4 years I have here? And I think the evolution of SOLA from being a scholarship program to then transitioning to becoming a boarding school, and then for girls only, and then realizing that we were setting up the first and only boarding school for girls, and then really being open to, wait a minute, we can't be a 4 year high school. We can't be an experience that starts at ninth grade, because that's already too late. And we learned that by bringing girls from places like Helmand and Kandahar, and then realizing that they had gotten to ninth grade, not studying every subject along the way, because they had such huge shortage of teachers in their schools. Their school principal would give them an arbitrary score on their transcript and move them up a grade. So just going to school meant they advanced to that level. So there was such a gap. On transcript, they were one thing, and then reality was something very different. And the other success of Sola came from really facing the actual hardships and challenges in Afghanistan, and not shying away, not pretending they didn't exist, or just hoping that a proven model that works elsewhere would work for us, and that we weren't driven by numbers or by talking about we have educated X number of girls in the span of this many times. That was really popular and hip, like trainings that could prove thousands of people. And scale was a big deal because it was urgent, everything needed to be addressed. And at a time when there was so much interest in scale, I was hitting brakes on that really hard and said, wait a minute, we need to really understand. And so the idea that we would commit to investing in girls' education over a 7 year period meant we needed to wait. We needed to have a lot of patience before we could say, here it is. And so we decided that students that we would bring to SOLA would start with us as sixth graders, right around the age of puberty, for many reasons. But one, it was in Afghanistan, girls at that age are still seen as girls and not women. So it was easier to convince their families to allow them to attend a boarding school. developmentally, as you know, it's an exciting time. You may know from that really wonderful report that came out from Human Rights Watch in 2017, something titled along the lines of "You will need a doctor, and I won't be a doctor to care for you," and that kind of goes through the challenges of girls' access to education, and it talks about how 60% of schools across the country lack water and sanitation facilities, and you look at the decline in girls' attendance in school right around that age, and you're not surprised. And that the main reason girls across the country didn't attend school was lack of and huge shortage of female teachers. And in one on, some of the traditional beliefs in some places, yes, prevalent, but that was even when you were in conversation with some of the most conservative communities. They said, give us the right space and the right environment and female teachers, we will absolutely allow our daughters go to school. So as I more listen to the typical naysayers around girls' education, and I engage in conversation, why are you not letting girls go to school? Like, you don't seem to be a bad. What is that? What is the issue? And I learned from them. I listened to what they were saying, and realized that if you create a proper environment, boarding school was such a brilliant solution. If you create a right environment, even the most conservative Afghan men would send their daughters. And it was true. We have daughters of some of the most conservative mullahs attending SOLA. We respect the privacy of all of our students for their safety, and we've always done that. That has been very critical for SOLA. And that has enabled that kind of trust for the families to then send their daughters. And then obviously, in terms of the challenges, in the beginning, there were a number of things. But then I think in Afghanistan, and I think even to this day, we have not figured out how to make the conversation around girls' education, women's right in general, a mainstream conversation. It's always a side conversation. No matter what you've seen waves and waves of lawmakers and others travel from Washington, D.C., come to Afghanistan. They will have their main conversations, and then the side conversations are always women and girls. And we never broke away from that. And we still haven't figured out how to mainstream these conversations to say, look, if you don't have girls going to schools, you're going to suffer economically. You're going to lose trillions of dollars, the economy of the entire country, and then by virtue, the region is going to suffer because you're going to lose on workforce. We haven't been able to get to that conversation. When you do, people have these brief aha moments and say, oh yeah, you're right. But then it never gets past that. And I think that remains a big challenge.
Yeah, well, it is. And we can talk more about that later. But I think that's a perfect segue to move to Ambassador Maines to really, first of all, I'd love Eugene to, share your story about working with SOLA, because we both did that when we were in Afghanistan together. But also, you being at UNESCO, really looking at how the U.S. government, which obviously had a role in, you were at the State Department in the high school program, and then working with the embassy, but how governments and international organizations should think about supporting girls' education because of its critical nature. And love to hear from you on that. And then for everyone who's online, please do put in questions if you have them, so that we can, ensure that we have a conversation going here. But Jean, if you could sort of talk about that, because I think, there are other women around the world who are doing tremendous work too, and thinking about how to support these kind of organizations and efforts to really be strategic about how to ensure that girls have access to education.
Yeah, first of all, it is really an enormous privilege to be here. So happy to see you, Shabana, and also happy to see you, Stephenie. And if anybody believes that I was Stephenie's boss, you don't know Stephenie.
Yeah,
I would say we were partners in crime. Good crime.
We were partners in crime. That's true. Okay.
So, it is just a privilege to be here. And for all those that are in the room and watching online, if you've had the privilege to work alongside any Afghan women or girls, what an inspiration it is. Shabana was talking about Afghan women in general taking advantage of the opportunity for education. And I think certainly that was my experience. You would meet an Afghan woman and she would be working at an NGO during the day, doing her master's at night, and starting her business on the side. I mean, it really was, you felt like such an underachiever because when they got the moment to actually show all of the capability that they have, it was just off the chart, impressive. And I think that's what, when I met Shabana, we were trying to figure out where to make good investments. And that can be change makers in the government, or it can be change makers outside the government. And so immediately when we met Shabana, I was like, she is a change maker. And so we want to make sure and keep every avenue possible pushing on education in whatever form, whether that's in the homes, whether that's online, whatever that is, you've got to find a way.
Well, and I think I saw there was a question in the chat, which actually I think goes to a lot of the issues of sort of where SOLA is now. And but also hearkening back, and I think it's kind of a three-part question. It's about how do you keep, ensuring that the girls who go to SOLA are safe. And it's sort of, to me, it's like three questions. It's talking about that in the pre-2021 era, talking about where SOLA's come to now, and maybe you can talk a little bit about where SOLA is now. And then just generally, and I think this is not just in Afghanistan, and then maybe go to Jean, like how do we ensure that as girls are going to school around the world, that they're in safe environments? So I'll start with you, but then move to Jean on that.
Yeah, and let me also start by saying that I completely agree with Ambassador Main's point about the importance of things on, at scale, like making sure that that has its own space and there is need for that. And I will talk a little bit how we are engaged now in that because of the need in Afghanistan. But to answer the question, both specific to SOLA girls in our boarding school pre-Taliban takeover of August 21, and also currently, we remained a small boarding school under the radar in Afghanistan by design. We never did any kind of advertisement on social media or anywhere when it was admission season. Our colleagues, we built networks, really comprehensive networks that to this day we're in conversation with through families of our students, through local journalists, through international journalists who are traveling to provinces, to really remote areas, and then us traveling to different provinces, raising awareness, having a conversation about, okay, if in your community you have this challenge of no schools for girls because you don't have female teachers, and if you don't let girls go to schools, then you don't have local female teachers. So how do you break this vicious cycle? Let's get in a conversation, send some of your daughters to boarding school in Kabul, and maybe they are going to be the first ones who will enter that space and then turn that vicious cycle into a virtuous one. And that will be the beginning of a change. Inviting those people, trusted people, saying, look, we would invite you, but we also have to trust you first, because we can't just invite anyone to campus. You wouldn't want for us to invite anyone to campus if your daughter is at SOLA, and then they will understand. And so the building that trust and SOLA security and safety. And then unfortunately we watched organizations that we consider to be like our sister organizations or doing similar work, like the American University of Afghanistan on a much larger scale, how they were being threatened or how they were dealing with those threats and safety issues. And then we were learning from loopholes or challenges that they would face and try to address our own. And we ended up having, at some point, with increased insecurity on the ground, armed guards. And we took a huge handle on, there were certain things that we could put out there in terms of our students' names or faces or for fundraising purposes that would have made fundraising much easier, but we took the hardest route. We treated our students' privacy with absolute respect and making sure that that was not compromised in any way, especially because they would come from remote parts of Afghanistan, and we wanted them to have the ability to go back to their provinces and and be safe. And we knew of the arrangements for some of the families who would tell their relatives that their daughter is staying with a sister, a married sister in a different town. They wouldn't say there, she's attending a boarding school in Kabul City. And so we had to be mindful of all of that. Now, but when we came to Rwanda, and for the purpose of this conversation and the limited time we have, for those of you who may not have seen the 60-minute segment on SOLA, I would encourage you to watch that, because that specifically talks about how we ended up in Rwanda and post August 2021. And if you're interested, you'll learn a lot more about that. But we currently, our focus on um, safety and security for our student isn't just a physical one, in terms of their privacy. Of course, we, take appropriate precautions with all of that, but we also expanded to a lot of mental health and well-being support for our students. We have a robust engagement with a hospital actually here in the U.S., and we work through their trauma team. We work with a group of clinical psychologists who are in several times a week conversation with our school leadership and with our residential life staff, and with others in our group, in terms of advising on how to care for our students. These girls now who are in Rwanda with us, they are away from their families. This is every day that passes is the longest that they've been away from their family members. And, it's not easy. And these are young girls who have chosen at this, really young age. They are making that sacrifice of not being with their families, not seeing them on a daily basis in order to receive an education. And then they also, once they come to Rwanda, or once they are in Rwanda, they live with survivor's guilt. They are constantly talking about older sisters or younger sisters or neighbors or friends of theirs who are not in school and they are in school, and how guilty they feel because of that. And so we have a lot that we have to deal with in order to make sure that and they're just so resilient. We sometimes forget young people are so resilient. Their hunger for education, for people who come to campus, now that we're in Rwanda and we've been able to invite this global village of Sola to be able to make visits. And Patricia, who's sitting in the room, she's visited us many times, so is Suzanne here. There's this different kind of dynamic energy on campus. Oftentimes the misunderstanding is that these girls must be so sad and low energy because they're not with family and they're away in Rwanda. But it's the absolute opposite. They are just so energetic. Their hunger for education is just every educator who's at SOLA, either as a staff members and faculty of SOLA or coming through as volunteers who teach, the thing they tell me, they start the sentence and I know how they end it. They have never taught a group of students, learners who are so passionate about education and learning. And when you speak with the girls, they know they're not studying just for themselves. They're studying on behalf of thousands of girls who can't be in school. And we see that evident in our admissions. The most number of applicants that we had received in Afghanistan, and we were already on a pretty we were seeing the numbers increase every single year in Afghanistan, but the most we got to was close to 300 applications from 30 of the 34 provinces in Afghanistan. That was for our cohort that we admitted for 2021. That started in March of 2021 in Afghanistan. Then when we arrived in Rwanda with our first admission season, we received close to 200 applications, a bit less than our most number in Afghanistan. And then the following year, when we announced our partnership with IOM, that we have admitted students that are chaperoned by a UN staff member from where their families are to all the way to Rwanda to us. And we made sure that went around to all the Afghan families in Afghanistan and globally. We also saw an increase in our admission numbers. In 2023, we received close to 2,000 applications from Afghan girls, And what is really heartbreaking is for 30 spots
Mhm.
at SOLA. And it was very difficult to, I don't share these numbers with pride. It's just with so much anger and sadness. This year, right now, we're in the midst of admission season, and we're sifting through 3,300 applications from Afghan girls, literally from every single province of Afghanistan except one. And we're having to choose only 30 applicants, and that's because SOLA, as a boarding school in Rwanda, we can only admit a certain number of students in our boarding school. As we're expanding it, we're hoping to, we're actually not hoping, we're actually starting the construction of our campus in early 2025, with the goal of finishing that by 2026, to expand our student population to close to 300 in Rwanda. And then we already anticipated this increase in interest in Afghan girls wanting to come to SOLA. So we made it from literally the day we landed in Rwanda. What happened was 4 days later, after we arrived, we resumed classes. And our students have been in classes ever since. And the other thing we did was we launched a strategic planning process, and we landed on 3 key priorities. Number one, establish permanence in Rwanda, that even when the time comes, and I don't say if, but when the time comes for us to go back to Afghanistan, we will go back to resume construction on our campus in Kabul. But for the time being, we have to have a home and a boarding school for these girls. We can't be in a rented facility that we have to make do, but we need to have this campus be that physical symbol, and much more than that, for Afghan girls globally who want to continue with their education. Number two, how do we bring SOLA to Afghan girls, since we can't bring all of them to SOLA? And we've taken 2 approaches. One is looking at online education. And fortunately, I have in my house, in my husband, an ed tech entrepreneur, and he signed up as a volunteer to do this. And the challenge that I gave him was, we need to create an opportunity, a platform that serves an Afghan girl who is relying on a borrowed phone for 30 minutes a day or a few times a week. So asynchronous, self-paced learning that can happen with access to, won't depend on internet as heavily. So anyone who can do with basic data on their smartphone can access this. And we ended up launching SOLA X as our online academy at the end of March of this year. For our first year, we had the goal of reaching 10,000 learners. And in less than 6 months, we surpassed that number. And at the moment, we're now entering our end of our 7th month, beginning of 10th month, 8th month, we are at close to 15,000 learners on our platform from every single province in Afghanistan, and then close to 70 nations across the world, with the most number of learners inside Afghanistan, followed by Pakistan, Iran area, and Pakistan, and then Qatar, where there's a huge number of Afghan refugees, and then Iran and other countries around the globe. We have launched with an ESL curriculum to begin with, and it was on purpose. There are so many Afghan girls who want to access education, but they need also access to English language. And we, at the end of September, launched 7th grade Afghan curriculum on the platform, and we aim to launch 8th, 9th, all the way through 12th grade in the coming months, and to make sure that all of the girls in Afghanistan who don't have access to education beyond 6th grade can continue. And the second part of our strategic priority, number 2, is that we have to explore now the models in between. We have a very high touch boarding school where girls come in, and we have a great number of faculty and staff who are there for their care. And we look at them as the future leaders of Afghanistan. And they're some of the best and the brightest of Afghanistan. And then we have this absolute high scale Solar X that can be accessed completely via WhatsApp, available in English and Dari and Pashto. And then what are the models in between? What about looking at the Afghan refugee communities in Qatar, in Turkey, in Greece, in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and other places? And how do we reach them? Is it a network of day schools that are pretty robust for 1 or 2,000 learners during the day, and it's morning to evening that covers meals and snacks and sports and access to study hall during the daytime, and then they go back to their home environments? Is it working through a UN agency that works effectively in certain communities and being working through them to reach Afghan girls? So that's yet for us to explore. And then the priority number 3, which to me is really essential in all of this, is SOLA is no longer a boarding school. It's a movement in the making. It's a movement of highly educated Afghan girls, Afghan women in the main, who are currently either exiled from Afghanistan or pushed out of Afghanistan and are establishing themselves in the Afghan diaspora. And I know that we also have to make peace with the reality that a lot of the ones who make it out, they may not necessarily go back to Afghanistan, and that's okay. But even if 10 or 5 or 15% of them go back when the time is right, we know they will be leaders in Afghanistan automatically. But the ones who don't go back, we still have an opportunity to have them be engaged in Afghanistan. We need to look at diaspora communities already are proven to be very effective when they're mobilized. But I want to look at the Afghan diaspora community, and I want women to be leaders in that. And I'd look at our students, where no matter where they're going to be settling, I want them to be leaders, and I want them to be connected. I want them to believe in the sisterhood that they belong to and that they come from, and I want them to imagine a future for Afghanistan that they can then support, fund. I imagine they're going to be really successful women, as we look into the future, and I want them to be able to support one another in that effort. So that's what SOLA is up to in the next few years, if you will.
Well, Jean, turning to you, I mean, thinking about this issue of safety, but also I think Shabana raises such an interesting question about like what has worked in other places that you've seen, that UNESCO is focused on, and how to bring that to bear and to really, broadening this group of broadening the scope of what educational institutions can do to reach girls in hard to reach places.
I mean, unfortunately, that number is growing. So you not only have the ongoing situation in Afghanistan, but you have the situation in Lebanon, you have the situation in Gaza, you have all kinds of across the world situations where people are being denied access or don't have access to education. And so how do you really operate in crisis areas so you don't lose a generation? And I think to Shabana's point on Afghanistan, when you look at the movement, and I love the way that you put that, because it's a movement that doesn't start when the policies change in Afghanistan. The movement is now. The movement is creating the networks, because what you want is you want to make sure that hope stays alive. And so that every girl, whether you're in or out of Afghanistan, that they realize that there is hope for their future. And that can come in a variety of ways. That can be, one of the very fortunate ones that makes it into the 30 slots, and SOLA in Rwanda. That can mean one of the ones that's doing the SOLA X online training. But then you can look at, okay, for the 270 of your applications that didn't get into the 30 slots, how do we take those applications and get them into something else? How do you leverage the whole network to say they didn't make it into these 30 that are going to Rwanda, let's get them into something. And that's where, when you have that network across of organizations, institutions who are all focused on education in Afghanistan for Afghans, women, girls, boys, men, but particularly women and girls, that's where I think we've got to join forces and make sure that not only the Afghan women and girls don't lose hope, but also the people that are working in international institutions. So I have the privilege to work with, people from 193 different delegations every day. And we have at UNESCO a group of friends of Afghanistan. So it's a group of countries that have decided to come together to really make sure we are working every day on Afghanistan. And for some delegations, they're like, well, we can't do anything. What's the point? And I said, no, there actually is a lot we can do. Cutter's at the table, others are at the table. There's a lot that still can be done, even with the restrictions that are in place. So if you look at, okay, girls can't go beyond the 6th grade, except in certain professions. So can we really move out in those professions that are currently allowed, which are in the healthcare industry, the nursing industry? It's not ideal. Women should be able to choose any profession they want. And I think that's ultimately the goal. But can you find paths to give women paths beyond, sewing in Afghanistan still, so that they can begin to get those spaces? Because if you look globally, there's a healthcare shortage. So can you take something that is a restriction and, at least for Afghan women, make it an avenue out? I don't know. I think
Yeah.
those are things we have to look at, because it can't just be the traditional lens of, how we do education normally, given the situation. But there are always paths, and there are always ways to get at things. You just have to really be creative and come up with things and then pivot. I think that's one of the main points for an institution like UNESCO or the US government. Sometimes we're very slow to pivot and adapt. But in these kinds of situations, you just have to. You have to see where the opportunity is and go there. And then maybe a year from now, there'll be a new policy and that avenue will close and you have to open somewhere else. But you've got to be able to navigate that in a way that makes sense. But again, focusing on making sure that women and girls see their future, see that they have a future, and provide those avenues, for when it becomes more open. But you have to do it today, and you have to create that movement that Shabana mentions. That movement is now.
Yeah, and it is, look, this is an uneven, or it's not even uneven. It's like, it is a very difficult, complicated situation, and how you navigate in that is hard, right? Because it's not what we all want it to be for Afghan women and girls. And so making those choices is, I think it's heart-wrenching. At the same time, it does give some opportunity. I see a couple of questions from Karen Decker, who's our chargé and head of the Afghan Affairs Unit in Qatar. So here's what I'm going to do, because we've told everybody that we'll be on for an hour. So we'll try to stick to that, although we can stay on and talk a little bit more. But I think, Shabana, Karen has a couple of questions.
I saw them,
because they're up on the screen. I don't know if you want to say a few things about sort of the role of SOLA in building bridges.
Yeah.
And then maybe right after that, I'm going to present you with the award, because I have to do that. That's why we're here, really. But Karen is obviously someone I have also, and Jean has also worked with for many years, and is a tremendous advocate for Afghan women and girls. I mean, in her job now, when we worked in the office on Afghan relocation, Karen was also my boss. This is like, all my bosses are here. Although I'm sure Karen might say what Jean did too. I am a hard person to manage. So, Shabana, I don't know if you want to kind of meld those two questions a bit, or how you want to answer.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador Decker, for your questions, and thank you for participating in this conversation. It's wonderful to have you here, and I look forward to having a follow-up conversation where we can discuss these in depth. But to talk about this, there is a great opportunity, and part of it is because SOLA has really intentionally stayed focused as a educational institution that really serves Afghan girls from across the country, and not serve so much in the in a typical Afghan civil society role in Afghanistan, if you will. And what I mean by that is, for the safety of our students, we have kept our students away from these conversations. So there might be a safe way for us to imagine engagement from our graduates, from our alumni who are already really keen on pursuing their own interest in engaging in Afghanistan. Some are running online education for Afghan girls, some are engaging through different avenues to support Afghanistan, engaging with refugee nonprofit organizations and others to do this work. And some are really focused on building a future for themselves in the private sector, and in a long run, thinking about what they can do in Afghanistan. So that is all really wonderful from my perspective. We currently have, not to single out in any way, but we have a SOLA alumni who's doing urban planning at MIT, and she's working with a professor studying, really focusing all of her work on Kabul City, the history of Kabul City, and also what opportunities exist. So there is opportunity for SOLA to play, and for SOLA girls and graduates to do that. One of the things that in the current climate I worry about is the significant majority of our students' families are back in Afghanistan. And until we understand what this would mean for their safety, the students most likely will want to know what that means before they can put their faces to this conversation. And beyond that, they are really, really strong voices, and they can play that role. So I would love to be able to discuss more detail in a conversation that we can have as a follow-up, either virtually or as I plan to be in Doha sometime soon. But also I see a quick question atop of that about SOLA X. It's a very simple way. So you go on to solax.org, and the opportunity is really, you look at service numbers on the homepage and save one of those service numbers on your phone and open WhatsApp and say hi to SOLA X. And then you will get a response in 3 languages, Dari, Pashto, and English. And then engagement with the chatbot within 2 minutes will have you registered as a learner, and then you will get access to the course catalog and choose what classes you want to enroll in, and request lessons to engage in. So I hope I was able to answer your questions, Ambassador Decker, but feel free to add any follow-on there.
Well, what I want to do now, and I know we probably will have some questions, but I do feel compelled. So I hope that all of you who are online in the room, and other friends who I know couldn't be here, know why it was like not at all difficult to decide that you and the work at SOLA would be the group that got my award this year. I've given the award to 3 other really amazing groups, all in the States, working in the United States, just to say, well, one is Global Girl Rising. They do work on girls' education globally. A group called Girls for Change in Richmond, Virginia, works with Black young girls and young women who are between 12 and 18. And I just want to put in a pitch for Angela Patton, who is amazing, because she just did a movie that's been all over the film festivals called Daughters, which is about girls connecting with their fathers who are in prison. And it's been everywhere. And she's amazing. And then a young woman in Florida who's done a lot of work with the General Federation of Women's Clubs in her community. And so you are the 4th. I'm not going to say you're my favorite, but along with this, obviously, we are making contribution to SOLA of $10,000. So to support this work, and I encourage all of you to support SOLA in whatever way. And here is the award as well that you can place on your at SOLA or some other place, and we can take some pictures later. But I did want to do that before we closed. I know.
Thank you.
Yay, virtual yay. For those of you, online, I wish you could be here, because it's always so impressive to be in the same room with Shabana and really listen to what she's doing and hear it from her. So in any event, I'm going to start with Jean and then turn to you, Shabana, for some last thoughts really about this, this incredible work, how we continue to support it. Again, not just with money, but with other resources. I know that SOLA is going to be, opening the school. Our architect is here, so that's been fun too, to hear that, hear her talking about what she's done to really engage with the girls and make sure the school is everything they want it to be. So really thank all of you for coming on. And Jean, I'm going to turn to you, and then Shabana just to close us out. And thank you again to everybody who's been on, and for all of your support for the work that gets done to really support women and girls around the world. So
thank you, Stephenie. And first of all, thank you for setting up this award, and for your own trailblazing career and every day that you're advocating for women around the world. It's really an inspiration. And Shabana, since that first day in that small room where we met down a road where I didn't even know where we were going. But then, after meeting you, knew that we absolutely had to do everything we could to support what you were trying to do, because you had such a clear vision as to the need and how you were going to try to get there for Afghan women and girls. And so over the years, it's just been a privilege to be part of that in some small way. And you can continue to count on our support at UNESCO. And we look forward to actually having you come, because I have no doubt that you could help me twist a few arms and get some more support. And so we look forward to having you there, and congratulations on the award. And I do look forward to seeing the new school in Rwanda. And again, thank you for being a beacon of hope to women and girls around the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Means. And Stephenie, I also want to echo Ambassador Means' words, and thank you so much. I have to say that, it's such an honor and privilege to have this vote of approval from you. You and Ambassador Means were one of the small handful of people who could come and see the work we're doing in person. And I know that was a decade ago. And for you to really highlight SOLA's work as part of your advocacy for girls and women in the United States, but also globally. It's an incredible support for SOLA, but also for Afghan girls and women, and this commitment to not looking away from Afghan girls and women. It means so much. Thank you. I want to close by telling you two small snippets of a story, because I love telling stories, and it's about our current admission season, and we're in conversation with Afghan girls, deciding who the 30 girls are that will join us. And one conversation yesterday morning was rather heartbreaking. A girl who just turned 13, she's a twin, her twin brother. She and her twin brother have been going to school together all this time, up until last year when she finished 6th grade. And now what happens is her brother continues to go to school, and then she waits at home for her brother to return home, and then she uses his books to continue to study. It's a story of hope and heartbreak. Hope because she has not given up, and here's a family, or her brother and her family are all engaged in how she can continue to study in their own ways. But a heartbreak because she, as a young Afghan girl, gets daily reminders that she's less than her twin brother. And that to me is painful to watch, that Afghan girls are struggling with that and so much more. And then another story, small snippet, is from another girl that we were interviewing, another 13-year-old girl who is from Afghanistan, of course. And she was telling us about the different ways that she's studying and thinking about her future. And what amazed us in the admissions committee, which by the way is led by SOLA graduates, this girl told us that she, in addition to studying all the Afghan subjects, she's been studying with a group of girls with an American teacher, subjects to get her GED certification. And when I heard her say that, I had to get her to repeat it because I couldn't believe that you have a 13-year-old inside Afghanistan who's figured out a way to think forward and really say, there's no one there for me right now. I have to really figure out a solution for myself that makes sense. You see, I'm studying, and I know that by the time I'm 18 years old, and if I want to continue with my university, I have got to have the kind of credentials that will be accepted globally. And I am going to study. I am going to go to university. So she came upon GED certification. And to me, that is hope. To me, that is very indicative of the drive and the commitment that Afghan girls and women have shown historically and continue to do, to not give up. And that gives me so much hope. That makes it so much easier for us to stay laser focused on the work we're doing, because we know that we're not doing this alone or in isolation, that what we're doing today is extraordinary, but it should never be extraordinary. Educating girls should be the most ordinary thing. Just simple as that. And that's the future that we're working towards. Working towards a future where we don't have to sit here and celebrate the work we're doing, really. But for the time being, knowing that we are not there, thank you so much for this recognition.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for coming. I see so many people in the chat who I know have worked on Afghanistan, and it's nice to see everybody joining. And thank you, Ambassador Maines. Thank you, Shabana. Thank you all for coming. And we'll all keep fighting. And for a future where I think you're right, where we shouldn't, I mean, without all due respect, maybe we don't want to be giving awards for people.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Founding boarding schools for girls in Afghanistan.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the dream.
Right. That's a good point. Good. All right. Well, thank you so much. Bye to everybody.